You've probably heard this a million times. It's one of those classic pieces of gardening advice. Don't water your plants in the middle of a hot, sunny day, because you'll scorch the leaves. But is that actually true? Is it a hard fact or just a myth that's been passed down? Well, let's find out.
So this is the big question, right? Can these little water droplets really act like tiny magnifying glasses and just fry your plants? It seems to make a lot of sense, which is probably why the idea has stuck around for so long. But does the science actually back it up?
Okay, so first things first, let's dig into why this idea is so sticky. I mean, it's rooted in what feels like common sense, and it comes with some very strong warnings from fellow gardeners.
And you see this everywhere. Take this comment from a Reddit gardening forum, for example. I mean, that's pretty convincing, right? I've seen this happen with my own 2 eyes. When people feel like they've seen the proof themselves, it's hard to argue with that. And the theory behind it feels so simple. I mean, we've all done this, right? You take a magnifying glass as a kid, you focus that beam of sunlight, and you can burn a piece of paper. The idea is that every single water droplet is doing the exact same thing, just on a super tiny scale.
And you know, this belief isn't just floating around on internet forums. It has actually made its way into academic papers. This quote here isn't from some blog post, it's from a 2018 scientific paper. When you see something like that in print, it suddenly feels a lot more credible, doesn't it?
All right, so we have this really strong belief system backed up by personal stories and even some academic mentions. But what happens when scientists actually put this theory under the microscope? Let's get into the real physics of it.
Okay, now this slide really gets to the heart of the whole thing. See, for that magnifying glass effect to work, you need a very specific shape, a perfect convex sphere. But here's the reality. On most smooth plant leaves, a water droplet just doesn't hold that shape. Gravity and surface tension squash it down, making it flat. And a flat droplet, well, it's a terrible lens. It scatters the light instead of focusing it into a hop.
So, reason number 1. This shape is all wrong. For most leaves, that droplet is just too squashed to effectively focus the sun's rays. The geometry just isn't there.
And okay, let's say, for the sake of argument, a droplet could form that perfect lens shape. There's still another huge problem: evaporation. Think about it. The exact conditions you need for this sunburn, hot, direct sunlight, are also the perfect conditions for water to just turn into vapor. The droplet would be gone long before it could do any real damage.
All right, so it's starting to look like this whole thing is a myth, right? For most plants, you're not going to cause sunburn by watering them. But, and this is a big but, the story doesn't quite end there. Science, as it often does, has this really fascinating little twist.
So, is it a complete myth after all? I mean, if the physics is wrong and the water evaporates, how could anyone claim they've seen it happen? Are all those gardeners just imagining things?
Well, not entirely. And this is where it gets really cool. A 2010 study from Hungary found one very specific case where leaf burn is actually possible. Researchers at Odzbolz University in Budapest decided to dig into every possibility, and what they found was pretty remarkable.
So the key to this whole mystery lies in something called the salvinia effect. It's named after a floating fern, salvinia, and these plants have leaves that are covered in these incredible, complex, waxy hairs that are super water repellent, and that changes everything. So check this out. Instead of the water droplet swashing down onto the leaf, these tiny water-hating hairs actually hold the droplet up, suspending it just above the leaf surface. And what does that do? It lets the droplet fight back against gravity and surface tension and form an almost perfect sphere.
And what is a perfect sphere? It's a perfect lens. Now you have a perfectly shaped droplet held at the perfect focal distance by those little hairs, and that can concentrate sunlight into a tiny, intense beam, hot enough to cause a real, genuine burn on the leaf. So for these plants, the myth is actually reality.
Okay, so which plants are we talking about? The floating fern is the classic example, of course, but this can also apply to some pretty common garden plants that have the right kind of fuzzy, hairy leaves. You know, like tomatoes or zucchini and squash. For anyone growing these, that old gardener's tale might actually be true.
But we have to be really clear here. This hairy leaf exception is, well, it's an exception. It's rare. So for the vast majority of plants in your garden, the ones with smooth leaves, what are people actually seeing when they notice those brown spots after watering?
Right, so if it's not the water droplets, what is causing those brown, burnt-looking spots on most of our plants? Something is definitely causing the damage. So what's the real culprit?
Well, the answer is almost always a condition that's just called leaf scorch. And it's really just a general term for the browning of plant tissue that's caused by some kind of environmental stress. It has absolutely nothing to do with water droplets acting as lenses.
And believe me, the list of real causes is pretty long. Those spots you're seeing could be from anything: drought, a lack of nutrients, or even too many nutrients. It could be compacted soil, the shock of being transplanted, salt in the soil, the list goes on. All of these are way more likely to be the culprit than the magnifying glass effect.
Yeah, and this image really drives the point home. You see this massive landscape suffering from water stress. What gardeners see on a single leaf is often just a tiny version of this. The plant just can't get enough water up to its leaves, so the tissue at the edges dies and turns brown. So ironically, the problem isn't the water on the leaves, but the lack of water inside them.
Okay, so we've gone through the myth, the science, that really cool exception, and the real reasons for leaf damage. What's the final takeaway? What's the practical advice for all of us?
Here it is, the final verdict. Water your plants whenever they need it. Seriously, if your plants are wilting in the hot midday sun, go ahead and give them a drink. The real risk isn't burning the leaves, it's just wasting a bit of water to evaporation. Sure, it's more efficient to water in the morning or evening, but it is always better to water a thirsty plant than to let it suffer.
And that really leaves us with one last thing to think about. Isn't it fascinating how an idea that sounds so plausible can become this unquestioned rule that gets passed down for generations? It really makes you wonder, what other bits of common knowledge in the garden and maybe everywhere else should we be taking a closer look at?